Good afternoon and welcome to the Space Madness Podcast. This is your host, Jeff Nasanov, and Wednesday the Cat will be here soon. Today we have a very interesting guest. His name is Nicholas Jedrich. Nicholas comes to us recently retired after 40 years with NASA, and most recently in an interesting role, the Chief Engineer of the Science Mission Directorate. Thank you, Nick. So it's a role that I didn't actually know was a distinct role other than the chief engineer of NASA itself. So I'm looking forward to exploring that. Now, I probably should have known that with my history with SMD, but as any listener of this podcast knows, we like to go way back and explore the journey of how our guests came to NASA in the first place. So thank you for joining me. And if you would you tell us how you decided this was for you? I mean, how early
Yeah,
was it in your life?
it was interesting. So I was getting ready to graduate in December of 1985. Seems a long time ago, doesn't it? And I was looking around at jobs, and to tell you honestly, my preference was to try to get a flight test job where I could actually do some flying and engineering at the same time.
Cool.
So I was looking at going out to Edwards Air Force Base as a civilian
Mm,
and had put in some paperwork there and all, but with government hiring or even contractor hiring at that time was pretty slow. So I was talking to my roommate one night over a few cold beverages, and I said, he goes, you should apply for a space shuttle job. He goes, I just got an offer from Rockwell. And I said,
wow.
I looked at him. I said, he goes, you don't have a job yet. I said, yeah. I said, I'm not too worried about it, but yeah. I said, sure, give me a point of contact. So there was a guy that named Dick Osborne that worked the Apollo program for NASA, and he had. This is when Rockwell created the shuttle operations company, and I put in my resume and a cover letter, and yeah, one thing led to another. I remember I graduated and I was still in St. Louis. I went to Parks College, which is notably known as the Gene Kranz as our notable
Oh,
alumni. Among
wow.
others.
Okay.
A lot of people from there. And I said, well, my dad's like, there's plenty of construction work. You can come home and do that. Right. Which is how I paid for my college. And I went home and I said, and they, I guess apparently this was before, everybody had their cell phone. So
Mm,
they were chasing me around trying to get a hold of me at Rockwell. So I got home on a Wednesday, I think it was, maybe Thursday. And they called me the next day and they're like, hey, here's an offer. So I was like, okay, I'll accept that. They're like, can you be in Houston on Monday? So I'm from upstate New York, right outside of
okay.
Syracuse.
Uh,
I literally turned my car around the next day and drove all the way to Houston.
wow.
Not in one day, but, 2
Sure.
days, right? And,
That's fantastic.
yeah, so that's how I ended up. I ended up about 2 weeks after that, I got a job offer at Edwards Air Force Base.
Wow. Okay.
And I said, I told myself when I went to Houston, I said, I'm gonna give it a year. I might like
Mm,
this stuff, right?
sure.
You never know. And, yeah, one thing led to another, and 40 years later, in January, I retired. So January
Wow.
'86 to January
2026.
2026. So yeah, it was a
Yeah.
good ride though. Can't complain. Can't complain
Amazing.
at all.
So I definitely want to talk more about the shuttle, but
Mhm.
I didn't mean to, but I kind of skipped past, it would be interesting to define the role of SMD chief engineer that you
Right.
ended with. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in the last 6.5 years, I would say that I had my dream job. I didn't quite know it at the time, but when I
Okay.
applied for it, but a few people were were kicking me. They're like, "Hey, you should apply for this." And it's like most things, you kind of go one way or another, and you're
Yeah.
like, so I put my application in, and I applied for a few different positions. I was looking to do something, kind of get more in. I kind of split my career between technical and project management, and I was
Hmm.
trying to get back kind of more into the technical realm and stop dealing with budgets and schedules and people yelling at you for things that you cannot control, right?
Yeah.
So I applied, and honestly, I crushed the interview. Not sure how, but it's not
Hmm.
it's not my best skill in life, but But yeah, ended up there. And so what that job is basically is there's the office of chief engineer. So you're familiar with the chief
Mm,
engineer. And at the time it
mm,
was a man named Ralph Rowe. And
mm.
then Joe Palaciotti took over from him. And Joe is retiring at the end of this month. And
Okay.
so both great people, loved working with and for them. And so there's, as you know, agencies going under a lot of change. But when I was there, each directorate, mission directorate, had a chief engineer coming out of the office of chief engineer, so we could
Mm,
maintain that independence, right? So even though I supported in the time I was there, both Thomas Zerbukin and Nikki
mm,
Fox. Great people, definitely distinct in their own character, right, as we
mm,
all are. But worked well with both of them and all the people in SMD. So my role basically was what we call technical authority, right? So I'd snoop around and use a network of trusted people that I had all over the place,
mm.
and try to sniff out problems before they became real problems, and basically make data driven recommendations to either the directorate itself or the divisions or programs and projects within there. So
Okay.
that was kind of the job. We always had about 40 missions in development and about 100 in operations. And I said, and that sounds like an awful lot, right? And it is, but 100 in operations, they would only call if there was a problem.
Sure.
But they were pretty nice to me that way.
Yeah.
Unless there was a
Well,
big problem, they kind
no,
of handled it themselves, you
nobody
know.
wants to tell the chief engineer of SMD there's a problem.
Yeah, maybe not, but
Yeah.
one way or another, I'd find out, and it was kind of comical. And in when we'd have the weekly kind of SMD leadership staff meeting, is I know they'd be like, and what about our chief? They'd be talking about something, and I get especially from Thomas, he'd be like, "Do you know about this?" And I'll be like,
Mm,
"Yep, already on it." So try
yeah.
to stay one step ahead of things, right?
Sure. I imagine you also did reviews of material that was going to go to Congress, things like looking for money for Mars sample returns, stuff like that. Was that in
Yeah,
your?
I didn't. My job really was pure technical. I didn't
Okay.
do I didn't do policy. I didn't do cost and schedule. If they had implications on the technical
Uh,
side of things, I'd certainly look at it. But no, that was one reason I took the job. I wanted to stay out of that. I'd had
I see.
at the
Okay.
time I stopped doing project management, I kind of had enough
Mm,
of it. Not
okay.
to say I
So
wouldn't do it again. Yeah.
sure. So sure. So you mentioned well. So I did a few episodes with Les Johnson a few months ago,
Uh-huh.
and he talked about the role of the chief engineer at the centers
Uh-huh.
as similar, but obviously at the regional/local level.
Sure, sure.
Now, were he and the other chief engineers of the centers kind of reporting up to you? Was that part of
No.
the? No. Okay.
No, that's that they normally report to the center director,
I see.
but
Okay.
I would interface with them,
Uh,
as needed.
okay.
And I actually one of the big things I tried to facilitate while I was there, and I think with some success, is I would work with the center chief engineers, even like at JPL and APL. I used to
Mm,
have a biweekly or monthly tag up with them. And
mm,
we tried to get, with limited resources, we tried to utilize the best we could and get different engineering directorates from each center, to
mm,
bring their expertise where needed, and how NASA likes to be a little bit siloed, right?
mm.
Hey, you guys do space science. You don't know anything about this.
Right.
Like, "Well, yeah, we actually do, but
Right.
and
Right.
so we were able to get the conversations going and the discussions that you need to kind of
Mm,
enhance the collaboration, because at least NASA, as I've always envisioned it, and the way it was when I was there, is everybody has some value, everybody has things that they can add, and why wouldn't you want those perspectives, right? Why wouldn't you want you
right.
want people to talk up, you want people to raise a flag, right? hey, this doesn't smell right. This is, so I think, part of the enjoyment I got out of the job was just that, bringing the right people to bear on a problem,
Mm.
regardless of what center they worked at or what they were working on.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that. It must have been rewarding at that level to be able to
Yeah.
call on the people across the country
Yeah. Yeah.
when you needed them.
Definitely.
So let's go back to the shuttle job.
Yeah.
Now that was with Rockwell, right? That was not
Right.
NASA yet.
Right.
So,
Right.
so what was it like kind of walking onto the scene there
Well,
so far along in the shuttle development?
yeah, it was, where at one point we thought we were, fully operational. So I started work only a few weeks before Challenger happened, which I guess made you really consider that, hey, this is serious stuff, right? You're just right out of college. You've been having fun, well, besides some of your classes, but,
Yeah.
for the most part, having a good time, hanging out with your friends and stuff. And yeah, to actually see that happen and was kind of shocked you to the reality of things, right?
Yeah.
And I think we had a lot of new hires, a lot of people right out of college. And
Hmm.
I think right then and there it was like, hey, we're talking about people's lives, this is serious stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it, it was inevitable. Did Challenger have to happen? Probably not. Columbia
Hmm.
probably didn't have to happen either. But hindsight's 2020, and when you're working, you're doing the best you can with the
Yeah.
information you have, right? So I'll tell you honestly, we just put our heads down and got to work, and got that thing flying again. But it was pretty surreal moment.
Well, it's hard to imagine. So were you old enough did you remember Apollo 11?
I had known of it, but
Uh,
not to any detail.
sure. But I mean, how old were you?
When that happened,
Yeah.
or when I started at
When
now,
Apollo 11 happened, I mean, did you see it?
I'm not even sure.
Okay.
I'm not even sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because
it's it.
I can
I mean,
imagine with.
shuttle was flying, pretty good, right? We were up to
Mhm.
the 26th flight, right? Yeah. Quite honestly, shuttle wasn't getting a whole lot of airtime, until
Mm.
until until Challenger happened. Unfortunately, people were
Yeah.
People were kind of like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, we've seen it, it flies around, every
It
once in a while
works.
you see it on the
Yeah.
news, right? It works."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The dream when I first got there was, we were gonna be flying this thing, about once a week, and there's tons of old articles. We used to actually make copies of them and put them up on our cubicle walls, like,
Uh-huh.
we were like, "I don't know how we're gonna fly once a week, but hey, it sounds good, right?"
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, it was supposed to be, if you remember correctly, the Air Force was supposed to fly shuttle
Mhm.
out of Vandenberg, out of Slick 6, which I saw somewhere. I think they just tore some of that down.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
So,
one of my other guests was trained for that as a mission specialist for the Air Force,
mhm.
but of course it didn't actually happen.
Yeah. Yeah, when I first got to Johnson Space Center, I was kind of shocked by all the Air Force people around, and then people
Hmm.
they're like, "Oh yeah, they're here to get trained so they can fly shuttle out of
Wow.
Vandenberg," and I think they were gonna have, like, their mission control in, Colorado Springs. I think that was the plan
Interesting.
back in the day. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it really
Well,
isn't
fun times. I loved working shuttle. It was
yeah.
real great community down there at JSC at the time.
Well, it's really striking to think of your career starting with Challenger.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, you had that adventure of driving there and you got set up and then I imagine you had some kind of orientation and then boom.
Yeah, well, it was funny because at the time, Rockwell had taken that, this big consolidated contract,
Hmm.
which was in the mission ops side of things was McDonnell Douglas at the time,
Hmm.
and we actually had to be trained by some of the incumbents at McDonnell Douglas, and They didn't really welcome us very well. They put us in this big conference room on one of their floors I remember off
Uh,
of Space Center Boulevard. And they gave us these obnoxiously like bright green and I believe purple badges that we had to wear around in the
wow.
building. They weren't too happy about losing the contract. And,
Sure.
eventually Boeing bought them out, but, they still had some contracts in engineering, but not they lost the big one.
Yeah.
So
Well, so how did you go from there to NASA proper?
yeah, so my wife at the time was working some, payload integration work, and they were just getting ready to do the, Hubble first servicing mission about a year
Okay.
out.
Uh,
And she was doing some work there, and she came home one day and she said, "Well, I've got this job offer to go work up at Goddard because they do payloads,
okay.
and they'd really like me to work up there and I was like, okay. And, honestly, I was having a good time working shuttle. It was like 8 years after I started on shuttle, right around
Uh,
there. And I was like, okay, well, the alternative is I'm going to be divorced right now, which I didn't want,
mhm.
or I'm going to have to find a job up at Goddard. And honestly, it was a big career change. I think for the better for really
Mhm.
what suited me more. I think
Oh,
I kind of went from being, I worked in flight design and dynamics, so I kind of went from doing analysis and trajectory design and operations more to a development arena,
okay.
hardware development. Still doing a little bit of op support when we were doing Hubble
Mhm.
servicing missions. I worked on SM2, 3A, 3B, and then we also flew an experiment on STS-95. So I was there like 13 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was you
Very
were a Goddard
rewarding.
employee. Okay.
Yeah, well, I was a contractor there for a small
Okay.
company for a while, and then transitioned over to a civil servant.
Okay.
Yeah.
At that time when they had did they have programs to help the spouses of the civil servant hires find jobs? I'm just curious.
No, nobody really. I mean, I had a few people suggest things, and
Mm,
definitely probably with the small company I worked for, kind of a friend of a friend helped me get an interview there.
okay.
But yeah, like I said, neither my wife or at the time or myself were civil servants, so we went up there both as
Oh, I
actors. Yeah,
see.
yeah. I mean, she became a civil servant soon
Uh,
afterwards, but when we first went up there, we were both contractors.
and then you did later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was
Okay.
I was with NASA 22 years, I guess, in that all told.
Okay, so that was 2004
Yeah,
when you
something like that. I think
switched.
so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what was your first role as a civil servant?
Yeah, so my first role is, well, we had Columbia, and we were, I would say, more than toying with the idea. We actually had the idea to do a robotic servicing mission.
Okay.
We worked like crazy on it. We partnered with Lockheed and to do what was called the deorbit module,
Mm,
and I was kind of the lead systems engineer working that at the time.
okay.
And we made it to PDR, and then at some point, I think it was Mike Griffin that said, we've been really successful using the space shuttle for these missions. We should probably do it again.
I see.
and and I mean, Mike, an outstanding brain of a person, he said everybody in the room got to look at each other like, yeah, we should probably do it with the shuttle like we've been doing it, right? And
I see.
astronauts. So that's what we did. That's how we proceeded. So, but it was a lot of fun doing a robotic, at least going to PDR with a robotic mission and working the concepts and all. That was a
Yeah.
good time.
And that was after Columbia?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah.
at that time was it becoming clear that the end of the shuttle era was sooner than later?
I
What
think
what
it
was the
became
attitude on that?
clear. Yeah, I think it became clear that they were going to use shuttle for ISS because they had to,
Yeah.
and that there would be very few, and that it turned out to be the case, very few non-space station missions, right?
I see.
because you're talking about, okay, they were like, okay, well, if we go to ISS, we've got safe haven, right? Right.
Yeah.
If we go to Hubble, we're on our own, right? Again. So,
Interesting. So there was really a comparison of, I mean, how many service missions were there for Hubble? I don't remember off the top of my head.
we did we did a total of 5. There was servicing mission 1, 2, then there was 3A and 3B,
Uh,
and then servicing mission 4 was the final.
wow.
So
Which one was the famous one where Mike Massimo pulled the panel off with his brute strength?
I
Or at least
think that was
I hope that's
I
not
think
anecdotal, but
it was either 3A or 3B, I think. I'm not
okay.
sure exactly what. Yeah, we always had interesting EVAs, right? It was
Mm,
always, I mean, we had the facility in Houston, and before that there was a facility at Marshall and Houston. And, tons and tons of astronaut training down to, you know, every second of the EVA, right? Almost, it seemed.
yeah,
And but there was always something that didn't quite go right. I
I
mean,
see.
you got this asset on orbit, and we built these high fidelity simulators, and did the best we could, and we had leadership that really believed in training and testing,
Yeah.
and everything you needed to be successful. But there were always a few things out there, and I used the EVA guys on all of the servicing missions. They were the EVA astronauts. They were really some cool characters. I mean,
Mm,
they for the most part, knew what they were doing, and worked with us and ways to do things right, because they're the hands, right? We're not.
right.
And, but every once in a while we'd have things that kind of bordered on the ridiculousness. Like, hey,
Mm,
could you move this bolt head, you know, a half an inch to the left? You're like, we just built everything, but sure we can.
interesting.
But very demanding, very exacting. But I think, when you're doing that kind of work, you need to be, right.
Yeah.
It's not, you've got that suit, you've got those gloves.
Mhm.
It's taxing. I mean,
Yeah, I think that's an underappreciated fact of space operations is that the gloves have to be super stiff and that
yeah,
it really limits human ability up there.
it's hard. I mean, you've got to have some grip strength. I think most of the astronauts I knew that that did EVAs, they really worked on it, so that they could do
Okay.
things with those gloves. We used to always have sets of those, so they used to, and they send those things around for public affair events and
Mm,
stuff. And the big test was, could you pick a dime up off a flat table, with the gloves
interesting.
on? So,
See, that's interesting because when I'm doing these podcasts, I'm often fiddling with this stack of quarters that are on my desk.
right,
And so,
right.
and yeah,
Yeah,
so that's just two
it was,
fingers.
and every all is, the kids out there, they'd always be like, these things are really stiff,
Yeah.
and we'd be like, yeah, they are. So
Hmm.
always thought, there's always been, I'm sure every EVA astronaut at one point or another said the same thing as they were trying to do a task, right?
Yeah.
Wish these gloves were a little less stiff, but
Yeah. Well, when you're designing hardware that will eventually be worked on with human hands, does that affect things like fasteners and
oh
the way
sure.
things are engineered so you can actually, I mean, I imagine there's lots of hand tools too,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Like
what,
definitely we used to have, well, especially like connectors for
mm,
electronics. Yeah,
uh,
we'd use these big circular connectors that had these wing tabs on them.
mm,
And we also made sure they were also uniquely keyed. So even though we had labels on all of them, right, that they could
uh,
read, right, even with their suit on, we always made sure that when they plugged it in, it would only plug into one spot.
sure.
Right, and then they could turn the wing tab and install
Yeah.
them with those gloves. On a lot of fasteners, we would make these basically double high heads on them, so that
Uh,
when they put like a socket on there, it wouldn't slide. They didn't have to
I
be as
see.
precise. Like,
Yeah.
you've any home mechanic, it's like, you slip off the top of the bolt head or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You're like, so we'd make those high. We also had fasteners that would basically fracture before they over torqued, things like
Oh,
that.
Interesting.
So we'd knock those down. But yeah, I mean, I'm not the mechanical specialist in the engineering field, but we had a lot of iterations there with the crew and how to do things right. But it was a really good partnership, right? You had to rely on the crew, and they had to rely on us. And I
Yeah.
think all the people that worked in kind of what we used to just refer to kind of as the EVA group,
Mm.
they were very dedicated and very, very good at what they did, and for
Yeah.
many years. And
Well, when
so,
you mentioned the plugs, the electrical connectors, I was thinking
mhm.
about USB ports that you always have to flip over 3 times for some reason.
Right, right. Luckily, we didn't have any of those on
Yeah.
Hubble. So I
Yeah.
don't, I don't, I don't think astronaut gloves and USB ports would work very well together. To tell you
Yeah.
honestly.
Well, so how did you get from, so you then made a transition from the human exploration side to the Science Mission Directorate. And
Yeah.
as we're talking, I haven't heard many stories like that. So how did that happen?
Well, I mean, Goddard is a science center, right?
Fair.
So
Yeah.
moving from JSC to Goddard, you kind of had to transition to and Hubble servicing was kind of an in between area, right? Because we still
Okay.
worked with JSC and human spaceflight people and of course crew astronauts. So that was a good transition to me. After that, I'm trying to think of what the first project I went to. Sure, at the moment, but anyway, yeah. Then at one point, I had after I did. I guess it was after I did robot when we were working robotic servicing for Hubble. After that kind of came to an end, I was like, I need kind of a new role here. I've been on Hubble
Mm.
servicing for a long time and very rewarding. But I was like, there's more to this to Goddard Space Flight Center than Hubble
Mm.
service. So so I started working, different robotic missions. Worked on things like Lisa, which is still going on for
Yeah.
gravitational waves. Worked on that for a while. I guess the highlight of my time at Goddard, but beyond Hubble servicing missions, was the Maven mission, which was the first planetary
Mm.
mission that Goddard led.
Okay.
Mars orbiter. It just went out of commission. What now? Few months back, right? But people have to remember that it was on like its, I don't know, eighth extended mission or something, right? It's
Yeah.
way beyond its lifetime, but
That
but
was
that
a,
was
was
that
that
was
the,
wicked rewarding.
was that the trace gas orbiter?
No, Maven
Okay.
name.
Okay.
So it was all about the Mars atmosphere,
That
right?
might be
So
what I'm
we
thinking of, because one of my first ever meetings at JPL in my first year was on a, this was 2010. Could that have been the formulation phase, or is that,
mm,
maybe I'm mixing up my
I'm
missions? But
trying to think. I
yeah.
think I think you're thinking of something else.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting journey from Hubble to, pure science missions.
Yeah,
I meant
yeah.
to ask about the role you ended up with. The last role was,
Mhm.
were you involved in mission selection? So in the sort of final technical selection authority,
Yeah, I
selection
mean,
official.
yeah, no, I was not a selection official, no.
Okay.
But right in SMD, it's normally the AA for the
I see.
director, right? So it was,
Okay.
when Thomas Zerbuchen was there, it was him, and then it
Mm,
transitioned. Now that Nikki Fox has been there for quite a bit, so they are the selection official. They kind of
okay.
have the final say. There's input from whatever division it's coming out of in that selection. They
Yeah.
have their own they have their own technical evaluation board that would come up with findings and risk assessments and that stuff. So I'd be in those meetings, but not really part of the selection. I
Sure.
I would I would comment on a few things that maybe the board
Okay.
came up with or something like that, but not really. My job's more to, once they're selected, make them happen, right?
Yeah.
Work on the mission success, do whatever I could to make them successful. That was really my job.
Well, I'm curious what lessons you brought from the human exploration side, specifically from the Hubble experience to SMD. I'd love your thoughts on that, because those are not questions I get to ask very much.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Each center, each directorate kind of has their distinct cultures.
Uh,
I think, that I don't know if there's really any one thing. I'm kind of a little stumped actually at the moment.
Okay.
I would say that the one thing that human spaceflight has going for them is it is centered around one thing, right? It is centered
Okay.
around human exploration, right? Science, on the other hand, is centered around a lot of different types of science, right?
Yeah,
So
I see.
so there and it can get contentious, right? I mean, there's always people, "Hey, why are we flying this when we should be doing this?" Right?
Right.
And I think the nice thing about human spaceflight, at least when I was there, is there's that kind of unity of goal, right?
Mm,
Everybody's kind of pushing in the same direction. Like even when at JSC, when you had space shuttle and space station, they depended upon each other.
right.
Right, right. I
That's
mean, there might
interesting.
be different people leading different efforts there, but in the
Yeah.
end, pretty much everybody was on the same side. That can't always be said about science because, especially with principal investigators, I mean, they're working their whole career to have a mission,
Right.
right?
Right.
And to them, and it should be, to them, it's the most important thing in the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
My science is the most
Right.
important thing,
Right.
right? And which puts the associate administrators of SMD in kind of a tough position, right? They have to decide, hey, what are our priorities, right?
Right.
You have influence from these decadal surveys, and
Mm,
hey, this should be the priority, right? And, but it's a tough, they kind of, they have to split hairs sometimes, right? What do I have?
yeah.
What can I fund? Because I've already got this big mission over here,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
that needs a lot of money and a lot of help. Right. And so I think from that standpoint, it's harder to actually manage the science portfolio than it is to
Hmm.
I'm not saying it's harder to launch a mission, it's just
Right.
harder to manage that,
Yeah.
what
Well,
what exactly you're doing, right?
would you, it seems to me that the unity of purpose of the human exploration program is even more specific. It's that they come back safely.
Well, sure, sure. I mean,
But to
it's
me,
it's the
that's a different
safety of
level
crew.
than the,
Nobody wants to lose a flagship
right.
science mission, but in the end, nobody's gonna die, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. There is that, and there is definitely a focus in robotic missions on safety, of course.
Mm,
Especially, being there is up through launch until you get separated, right? There's always a lot of safety concerns there. So I wouldn't say that it's not thought of, because it is, and there's
sure.
very good people working it. But again, there's that distinction, right? There's the people, right? So
Yeah, it's an interesting phrasing of that as something that's 10 times bigger than Science Mission Directorate, at least, but to think of it as having a simpler goal almost, or a
well,
more
I
unifying goal. There's
I think
maybe,
so. I wouldn't I
yeah,
wouldn't say it's human spaceflight is definitely
yeah,
not easy, right?
sure, and
But
not
but
technically
but
simpler,
yes,
but
but yeah,
mission,
right now, I mean, right now the goal is, not only get back to the moon, but you know, have it occupied, right? I mean,
yeah,
so you can rally your team around that, right?
mm,
Science, I can tell you right now, at times it's like, people look at it as it's me versus them, and I want my
sure,
mission, right?
yeah,
I'm an astrophysicist. I could care less about your solar physics, right? Or
right.
what, whatever, right?
Well,
So
and the science missions take so much longer and last so much longer that you have resource commitments stretching out a decade in some cases, right? And extended missions versus shutting down and a
sure,
lot
sure. You have
more.
to make those decisions. I would
Yeah.
say, I would say though, SMD has really they've started embracing, more of these fast turnaround,
Mm,
2 or 3 years of science, more kind of, more of a focused effort, right?
yeah.
Small sats, even CubeSats in a lot of instances, and what you can do with those. So I think
Right.
there's still room for the flagships of the world, the James Webb Space
Mhm.
Telescope, things like that. And I think striking that balance. What's going to get you the most bang for the buck, right? What's going to
Yes.
give me the most science for whatever I have available, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole game right now, right? And
W-
I think it always has been, but it's not like you can afford a flagship.
Right.
You just can't afford them very often, right?
Right.
So,
Well, and we have this interesting experiment that was announced this week where there's a Mars mission basically being directed at a contractor,
mhm.
Relativity, that
Yeah,
Jared announced earlier this week.
yeah.
I'm
That's a lot
curious,
interesting.
as someone who's gotten science traceability matrices written, I'd love to see what they have, but I doubt I will be able to. I mean,
Yeah,
my concern is that the science kind of battling it out will have been secondary, but I don't know that I'll ever know that.
yeah. Again, it's always whose science is a priority,
Right.
and how can you make it happen, right? And
Sure.
I would say that it's under the principal investigator model of things where they're really responsible for the mission. One of the things I've always said is, set your requirements and don't
Hmm.
keep changing them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, one good way to ruin your budget and your schedule is to keep changing requirements.
Yeah.
And the missions that are successful, are usually very focused,
Hmm.
have enough reserve, funding, so when things do go bad, and they will go bad, right?
Yeah.
That they can recover quickly and move forward. But in the end, I will say this, and I think about it every day that I'm on this earth, is it really comes down to people.
Hmm.
If you got a good team, you can do miracles. All right.
Yeah.
You can recover from a fire or whatever. And,
Yeah.
a few days later, you're back up and running. And
Mm.
that's all just the people you have, that if they take ownership, if they're accountable, if they know what they're doing, it's a big difference maker. And you don't
Yeah.
always have that, and so,
Right.
but if you look at you look at the missions that are successful, you'll always
Mm.
see some of that. That it's a few. It can be the whole team and everybody
Hmm.
contributes, and every once in a while it comes down to just a few people making the
Right.
difference, right? So, but
Well,
that's what makes it fun.
yeah. And I think that's a really wonderful theme to end our discussion on, is that it really is all about the people, whether
It is.
they're in space on a human mission or behind the screens and
It's
designing
it's and
everything.
it's and it's every person that's on that team that
Mm.
touches it. It's everybody has their role, and everybody has added value, right? I mean, it's not you can't be dismissive of people. You've got to respect them. And yeah, sometimes, guess what? Sometimes it's not something that you really need to listen to, but you need to listen to it, right?
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
kind of that, it may mean nothing, but you need to have the respect of the people, and be there to listen. If and they need to understand that, guess what? You're not gonna lop their head off for saying
Right.
something, right? Right.
Right.
I think that's the other part of it is, get the good people, build your team, respect them, respect what they have to say, what they bring to the table. Everybody has a good perspective. Everybody has their experiences, and guess what? No one person knows everything, that's for sure.
Mm.
So,
Well, on the topic of listening, I want to thank everyone listening to this podcast for tuning in for another episode. And thank you, Nick, for a really interesting and invigorating conversation.
well, thank you.
And
Thanks for asking me.
well, my pleasure. And we'll see you next time on the Space Madness podcast. Thanks again.